I'm 104 years old, and cold water is not a wellness trend. It is one of the most powerful biological forces you can deliberately expose yourself to, and almost nobody understands why. People hear cold shower, and they think discomfort. They think discipline. They think of some fitness influencer dunking into an ice barrel for likes. That is the surface. That is the noise. What I want to talk about is what cold water actually does inside the human body, inside the nervous system, inside the blood, inside the cells. Because when you understand the depth of this, you stop seeing a cold shower as something you endure. You start seeing it as something you have been depriving yourself of. Let's begin with what most people think they know. They've heard cold showers are good for circulation. They've heard it wakes you up. They've heard it's good for the immune system in some vague, general way. And all of that is technically true, but it barely scratches the surface of what's actually happening. Saying cold water improves circulation is like saying fire is warm. It's not wrong. It's just so incomplete it almost misleads you. Here's what actually happens the moment cold water touches your skin. Your body perceives a threat, not a metaphorical threat, a genuine ancient survival-level signal that tells every system in your body, adapt or die. Your blood vessels constrict immediately, pushing blood away from the skin and toward your vital organs. Your brain fires a cascade of norepinephrine. Not a small amount, not a trickle. Studies show norepinephrine levels in the brain can increase by 300 to 500% during cold exposure. This is the same neurotransmitter that governs focus, attention, mood, and energy. This is why you feel alert after a cold shower. Not because the cold woke you up the way an alarm clock does, but because your brain just flooded itself with one of its most powerful activating chemicals. But it goes even deeper than that. That surge of norepinephrine isn't just a temporary caffeine-like buzz. Regular, consistent cold exposure trains your body to produce and regulate norepinephrine more efficiently over time. You're literally rewiring your neurochemistry. You are teaching your brain's stress response system to become more resilient, more precise, more controlled. Every morning you step into cold water, you are doing a training session for your nervous system, not your muscles, not your lungs, your actual nervous system. And that matters far more than most people realize, because the quality of your nervous system is the quality of your life. Now here's what most people miss entirely. The cold itself is not the benefit. The cold is the stimulus. The benefit happens in the recovery, in what your body does after you step out of that shower. This is the principle that separates surface-level understanding from real understanding. Your body, having detected what it interpreted as a survival threat, now overcompensates. It floods you with warmth. It upregulates metabolic activity. It activates something called brown adipose tissue, brown fat, which is metabolically active fat whose entire purpose is heat generation. Most adults have brown fat, but it sits dormant, untrained, inactive. Cold exposure wakes it up. Cold exposure trains it. And active brown fat doesn't just generate warmth. It burns energy continuously, improves insulin sensitivity, and has been directly linked to metabolic health and longevity markers. The people who live the longest tend to have more active brown adipose tissue. And one of the most reliable ways to activate it is regular cold exposure. The real power is in understanding that you are not fighting the cold. You are using it as a trigger. You are using it as a tool to force your biology into a state of productive stress, what scientists call hormesis. Hormesis is the principle that a small, controlled dose of a harmful stimulus produces a beneficial adaptive response. Exercise is hormesis. Fasting is hormesis. And cold is one of the purest forms of hormesis available to a human being with no equipment, no cost, and no side effects. But let's go deeper into what happens at the cellular level, because this is where the real longevity conversation lives. Cold exposure activates something called the cold shock response. When your cells experience a drop in temperature, they produce a family of proteins called cold shock proteins. Most notably, a protein called RNA binding motif protein 3, or RBM3. This protein has a remarkable function. It helps repair and rebuild synapses in the brain. Synaptic loss, the breakdown of connections between neurons, is one of the primary mechanisms behind cognitive decline, neurodegenerative disease, and the general mental dulling that people accept as inevitable aging. RBM3 actively works against that process. It is a synaptic preservation signal triggered by cold. This is not speculation. This has been demonstrated in laboratory research, and scientists studying it believe cold-induced RBM3 expression may be one of the most important neuroprotective mechanisms the body has available to it. So when I say cold water has kept me feeling 25 for 60 years, I'm not being poetic. I'm describing a biological reality. The brain that steps out of a cold shower is a brain that has just activated its own repair mechanisms. And here's what connects all of this to something even more fundamental. Your body has two states, a state of ease, where everything is comfortable, stable, and conserved, in a state of adaptive pressure, where discomfort signals the system to improve, to tighten, to fortify. Modern life has almost entirely eliminated adaptive pressure from the physical realm. We have heated everything. We have cushioned everything. We have made every environment thermoneutral, perfectly comfortable. And in doing so, we have removed one of the most ancient signals that kept the human body sharp, resilient, and biologically young. Cold water is one of the only ways to give that signal back to yourself deliberately. Now, let's talk about what this does to inflammation. Because inflammation is the hidden engine behind almost every chronic disease and almost every marker of accelerated aging. Cold exposure has a direct and powerful anti-inflammatory effect, but not through suppression. This is a critical distinction. Anti-inflammatory drugs work by suppressing the immune and inflammatory response. Cold exposure works by training it. There's a difference between a suppressed immune system and a trained, disciplined immune system. Cold exposure teaches your immune system to respond and resolve, rather than linger and accumulate. The reduction in systemic, chronic inflammation from consistent cold exposure is measurable in blood work. Inflammatory markers go down, recovery speed goes up, and because inflammation is the common mechanism behind heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, joint degradation, and cognitive decline, reducing it systematically through cold exposure is one of the most broadly beneficial things a human body can do. Go deeper still. Cold exposure affects the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, which runs from your brainstem down through your neck, chest, and abdomen, regulating heart rate, digestion, mood, immune response, and inflammatory reflex. Cold water on the face and neck directly stimulates the vagus nerve. This is why cold water has been used to treat panic attacks, acute anxiety, and acute stress responses. The vagal stimulation from cold activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and repair branch, while simultaneously having triggered the sympathetic fight-or-flight response. What you're training is the transition. You're training the speed and completeness of your recovery from stress. This is called vagal tone. High vagal tone is associated with better emotional regulation, better heart rate variability, better immune function, and longer life. Cold exposure is one of the most direct vagal training tools that exists. Here is the practical power of all of this brought together. If you step into a cold shower every morning, you are doing the following simultaneously: activating and training your norepinephrine system, increasing brown fat metabolic activity, triggering cold shock protein production and synaptic repair, trading your inflammatory response toward resolution, stimulating and conditioning your vagus nerve, and building a daily practice of controlled stress tolerance that transfers directly to every other challenge in your life. No supplement does all of that. No drug does all of that. Cold water does all of that every single morning for free. The deeper principle underneath all of this is that the human body does not want to be comfortable. It wants to be challenged in proportion to its capacity. It is designed to face stress and grow from it. That design is millions of years old. The body that faces controlled cold is a body receiving one of its most ancient evolutionary signals. The signal that says, the environment is demanding, stay sharp, stay strong, repair, fortify. That signal, when given consistently and deliberately, produces a body that functions at a higher level across every system. Most people have cut off that signal entirely. They live in 72-degree rooms, they shower in warm water, they sleep under heated blankets, and they wonder why their energy is low, their focus is scattered, their joints ache, and their body feels older than their years. The absence of the cold signal is not neutral. It is a slow subtraction from the body's adaptive capacity. The application is simple and the threshold is lower than people think. You do not need ice baths. You do not need extreme temperatures. Research consistently shows that the beneficial cold shock response activates at around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 16 degrees Celsius. That is the cold end of a normal shower. 2 to 3 minutes is sufficient to trigger the norepinephrine surge, the brown fat activation, the vagal stimulation. The dose is small, the return is enormous. Start at the end of your regular shower, turn it cold for the last 60 seconds. Build from there. Your body will resist the first week. That resistance is your nervous system recalibrating. By the second week, something shifts. The resistance softens. What was shock becomes stimulus. What was discomfort becomes a signal you begin to recognize and then to seek. That is the training taking hold. That is your nervous system learning a new relationship with stress. And here is what most people do not anticipate. By week 3 or 4, you will notice changes that have nothing to do with the shower itself. You will notice that other stressors land differently. A difficult conversation at work, a moment of physical pain, an unexpected disruption to your plans. They all carry less weight, not because your problems are smaller, but because your nervous system has been trained daily to face the shock and return to baseline. You have been quietly increasing your stress threshold without even realizing it was happening. The cold was the classroom. Life became easier to navigate. There is something else worth understanding about the psychological dimension of this practice that people overlook almost entirely. When you step into cold water deliberately, when you choose discomfort, you are doing something to your identity, not just your body. You are demonstrating to yourself, at the cellular level of your psychology, that you're someone who does hard things, that you're someone who does not need comfort in order to function, that you're someone whose will is stronger than your resistance. This sounds abstract, but it is profoundly concrete in its effects. The person who can step into cold water every morning without negotiating with themselves carries a different internal posture into every other challenge the day presents. The cold shower is a microdosing of courage. It is a daily rehearsal of the kind of person you want to be, someone who acts despite discomfort, who moves toward difficulty rather than away from it. Over months and years, that daily rehearsal becomes a deeply rooted identity. An identity, it turns out, is one of the strongest predictors of behavior. Who you believe yourself to be determines what you consistently do. Cold water, practiced every day, slowly and silently rewrites that belief. Cold water has been a daily ritual across human civilizations for thousands of years. From Nordic traditions to Japanese misogi to ancient Greek and Roman cold plunge practices, these cultures did not have the neuroscience, but they had the observation. They saw that people who practiced cold water immersion were more vital, more resilient, more mentally clear, and lived longer. They were right. We now know the mechanisms. The wisdom was always there. The science just caught up. At 104, I do not feel the weight of age that most people carried decades earlier. I attribute no single thing to that, but I attribute cold water to more of it than almost anything else. Not because it is magic, because it is honest. It asks something of your body every single day. Your body responds by staying alive to the conversation. That is what cold water does. It keeps your body in the conversation with life. And that conversation, kept alive long enough, is what we call vitality.